You can start, Mataji.
Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurudmilidam Ena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Today I'm going to read the book Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Satsvarupa Dasa Goswami. Hare Krishna. We must conclude that the darkness of the present age is not due to lack of material advancement, but that we have lost the clue to our spiritual advancement, which is the prime necessity of human life and the criteria of the highest type of civilization. Throwing out bombs from aeroplanes is no advancement of civilization from the primitive, uncivilized way of dropping big stones on the heads of the enemies from the top of the hills. Improvement of the art of killing our neighbors by inventing machine guns and by means of poisonous gases is certainly no advancement from primitive barbarism, priding itself on its art of killing by bows and arrows, nor does the development of a sense of pampered selfishness prove anything more than intellectual animalism. Thus, while others were yet in the womb of historical oblivion, the sages of India had developed a different kind of civilization which enables us to know ourselves. They had discovered that we are not at all material entities, but that we are all spiritual, permanent, and non destructible servants of the Absolute. The speech continued, describing the horrible consequences of a misspent human life, the sufferings of repeated birth and death. Again and again, Abhay stressed the need to surrender to the spiritual master. He criticized empirical mundane philosophers, godless politicians, and blind sense gratifiers. He repeatedly pointed to the soul's natural sublime position as a servant of God and as a servant of the pure devotee of God. Abhay, an initiated disciple of his spiritual master, for a little more than 2 years, referring to himself as a student, continued, Gentlemen, although we are like ignorant children in the knowledge of the transcendence, still His Divine Grace, my Gurudev, has kindled a small fire within us to dissipate the invisible darkness of the empirical knowledge. And we are so much so on the safe side that no amount of philosophical argument of the empiric schools of thought can deviate us an inch from the position of our eternal dependence on the lotus feet of His Divine Grace. And we are prepared to challenge the most erudite scholars of the Mayavada school on this vital issue, that the personality of Godhead and His transcendental sports in Goloka alone constitute the sublime information of the Vedas. He then ended his speech with an eloquent prayer of submission. Personally, I have no hope to have any direct service for the coming crores of births of the sojourn of my life, but I am confident that someday or other I shall be delivered from this mire of delusion in which I am at present so deeply sunk. Therefore, let me with all my earnestness pray at the lotus feet of my divine master to let me suffer the lot which I am destined to do for all my past misdoings, but to let me have this power of recollection that I am nothing but a tiny servant of the Almighty Absolute God, realized through the unflinching mercy of my divine master. Let me therefore bow down at his lotus feet with all the humility and he submitted both the poem and speech to the harmonist. The poem, Abhay's first publication, announced him as a competent writer in English, and Swami Bhakti Pradipa Tirtha, editor of the Harmonist, informally dubbed Abe as Kavi, learned poet. Some of Abe's god brothers also picked up on the name and began calling him Kavi. Most of them, even the sannyasis, were not so proficient in English, but Abe was not ordinary. They could appreciate that the poem was personal, written out of Abe's genuine worship and his joy at having accepted a genuine spiritual master. But it was also written strictly in accord with the conclusion of the scriptures. For Abe, however, the glory of his Sri Vyas Puja homage came when the poem reached Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati and it gave him pleasure. One stanza specifically made Srila Bhakti Siddhanta so happy that he made a point of showing it to all his guests. Absolute is sentient, though has proved. Impersonal calamity, though has moved. Somehow, in this simple couplet, Abe had captured the essence of his spiritual master's preaching against the Mayavadis, and Srila Bhakti Siddhanta took it as an indication of how well Abe knew the mind of his Gurudev. Abe was delighted when he heard that the couplet was pleasing to his spiritual master. One of Abe's god brothers compared this verse by Abe to a verse in which Rupa Goswami had expressed the inner thinking of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and had thus moved him to ecstasy. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati also found the essay pleasing and he showed it to some of his confidential devotees. He instructed the editor of the Harmonist, whatever he writes, publish it. Abe thought it only natural that he should have many business enemies or competitors. It was a sign of success. But his Bombay competition caused him to lose another good chance to become wealthy. The enemy was the son of Abe's supervisor at Smith Institute. Both son and father complained to the Smith Institute executives that Abe Chalande was pushing goods from his own laboratory and not Smith's. By this intrigue, Abe lost his position with Smith's Institute, and his supervisor placed his own son as a new agent. Abe was again on his own. While continuing to help his sannyasi godbrothers in Bombay, he found a two-story building for rent at Gaulia Tank Road. Everyone agreed it would make a suitable center, and Abe arranged for the rental and for initial repairs and helped the sannyasis move in. It seemed that his endeavors for spiritual things were always successful, whereas his business efforts were constantly failing. Of course, a few business enemies were no cause for discouragement. Intrigues and losses were always part of the game, and he was still well known in the pharmaceutical business throughout India. But it wasn't so much the give and take of business that disturbed him as his own doubts about whether this was the best way for him to serve his spiritual master. Business was good only if it could go side by side with his spiritual life. Lord Chaitanya had said that the chanting of Hare Krishna should be spread to every town and village, and Abe wanted to assist his spiritual master in fulfilling that prophecy, especially by contributing money and helping establishing centers. His earnings should not go solely for his family. Ideally, family life and spiritual life should progress side by side. But the difficulty was Abe's wife. She was disturbed over the business losses and apathetic to the spiritual success. She wanted to stay with the orbit of home and family, and despite Abe's suggestions, she refused to accept initiation from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta. It was his own wife who was his most formidable competitor, and she waged her opposition right in the home where it was least welcome. Hare Krishna. In today's reading, Abe, a devoted disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, articulated that India's true gift to the world was its ancient, obscure knowledge of spiritual advancement, which he believed was the only path to a high civilization, and it is the prime necessity of life. Civilization means not throwing out bombs, using guns or poisonous gases to kill enemies. He publicly declared his absolute submission to his Guru Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and successfully challenged the Mayavadi philosophy through his published poem and essay, which he published in the magazine called The Harmonist. Thus, he earned the title of Kavi, and he also received high praises from his Guru. The Guru told the editor to publish whatever he writes. Despite his spiritual success, his business was constantly failing. Then he lost his position at the Smith Institute. After that, he rented a place and opened up a center in Bombay for his god brothers and sannyasis to stay. Because of his failing material endeavors, Abhay's wife, Radharani, wasn't very happy. She was his most formidable competitor. She remained apathetic to his spiritual life, refused initiation from Bhaktisiddhanta, and actively undermining his attempt to establish a preaching program at their home. Hare Krishna.